Now let's talk to Dr. Tony Agwans, Senior Lecturer, Anglia Ruskin University. Dr. Agwans, good morning. Thank you for making out the time to be with us today.
Yeah, good morning, Olumide. My pleasure to be here this morning.
It seems it depends on who you're listening to on both sides of the divide, whether the Ukrainians and their allies or Russia's President Vladimir Putin. For the former U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says that Russia has lost the war in terms of what it wanted to achieve, and that one of those intentions was to wipe Ukraine off the map. The Russian president and the Russian Federation has never said that they want to wipe Ukraine off the map. But at this stage of the war, what is the most correct assessment of the state of things? Is it that Russia has lost the war, or that Ukraine's counteroffensive is making gains and that they will win the war in the long run?
Yeah, thank you, Olumide, for that question. And I would say it's a kind of a double-edged question you've thrown at me this morning. And my simple answer is to say that it depends on whose side of the fence that you are standing on, that then you will say, this is the side winning the war. At the moment, it's a no win-win situation for both sides, even for all the allies, you know. So nobody is winning. It's just pure carnage, destruction of human lives and property, a lot of problems for the world economy. So it's just, for me, this crisis is a senseless one. Apologies for my language. And nobody's going to win this except maybe at some point one party decide to use nuclear weapons, and we hope it doesn't get there. So, because when you listen to Ukraine, you hear their side of the story. You are sympathetic to them, and for every reason, we have to be sympathetic because they are actually the one on the receiving end. Because most of the casualties are actually happening on Ukrainian soil, right there in Ukraine, across the country. Okay, and then when you hear Russia talking about they don't want Ukraine to be part of NATO because they don't want their enemies to be near their border, and then you start thinking about a lot of things as well. And then when you listen to NATO, they see Russia as a threat, you know, to the world geopolitical order. So for me, it's just a circus show. And like we've always said on this program, I think all sides to this crisis need to come to the negotiating table.
Dr. Agwans, does Ukraine want to turn this at the front line of the counteroffensive into a cluster munition war? Now that President Vladimir Putin has said that we also have cluster munitions, though both sides have not admitted to using them, reports have it that they have used them. So the extent to which they've used them is the question. Now that they have a whole stockpile from the United States, and Russia says they will use theirs, it seems that Russia is playing the waiting game to see whether Ukraine will indeed use these cluster munitions on their own soil. Who will be the loser at the end of the day?
Yeah, absolutely. The cluster munitions that the U.S., sent to Ukraine has actually arrived. It's been delivered, and more are still being expected inside Ukraine. And the Russians did not even waste time. Russian President Putin himself saying, oh, they even have more reserves of cluster munitions in their armory and all that. So I think they will also use it. They will use it, but because they are the aggressor and Russians are not actually Ukrainians, I think when they begin to use these cluster munitions, Ukraine will try to use it to slow down Russian advances. Let me just quickly chip in here that the Ukrainian counter-offensive has been slow. It hasn't gone speedily as many would have expected. So, and this is one of the major reasons why the U.S. Had to supply those cluster munitions, so they can plant it everywhere around enemy areas within Ukraine, and then it will slow down Russian soldiers' advance inside Ukraine. So these are military tactics, and but I really don't know how Russia intends to use that. But Russia has been using a couple of these cluster munitions before now. We saw bits and pieces, that were scattered after some missile attack earlier this year and late last year. So this is just a case of, who bite first now. That is where this war is. And a lot of analysts are also saying that on both sides, both the Russian side and the Ukrainian side, there is some war fatigue already. So but I think both sides are getting tired of this crisis as we stand.
For the use of the cluster munitions, it appears the bone of contention, as it were, is that it is on whose soil it is used that suffers the most because of its use. And even though it appears the Ukrainians have seemingly counted the cost and they want to go ahead and use these weapons on their own soil, do you think it's a wise decision?
Yeah, I think under the circumstance that the Ukrainians have found themselves, it's like I said in this program last time I was here. I said it's a case of standing between the devil and the deep Red Sea. So the Ukrainians really have no choice, because the Russians are the aggressors here, and the Ukrainians are the ones on the receiving end. They have no choice. So they just have to find a way, to reduce, to slow down Russian advances. Because when you look at the purpose from the Russian side of this crisis, it's a question of, let us just annex this smaller nation. Militarily, we are bigger than them, and data that we have shows that for every one ammunition that Ukraine has, Russia has ×4. So in terms of military might and power, the Russians are the Goliath, in this scenario. And the David does not even have a sling and stone. So that is where this crisis is. So when you look at it, technically speaking, I think the Ukrainians, they have no choice, although they will really suffer the consequences of using these cluster munitions in years to come on their soil.
Well, Doctor, this David may not have a sling and stone, but he has a Storm Shadow missile, and he has cluster munitions. He also has Leopard tanks. But now, I think it's Mike Tyson in the world of sports, speaking of boxing, that said that everyone has a plan until you get
to the ring.
hit in the face. No, everyone has a plan until you get hit in the face. And we know that in marathon running, for those who jump the gun and expend their energy at the onset of a long-distance endeavor, they tire and they're overlapped, and in many cases, they drop out. If this war continues to be protracted, what do you think will be the measure that Ukraine can take to go the distance and dispel the Russian aggression?
Yeah, when you look at it, like I was saying, I was trying to describe, and what you said now, you are using the illustration of sports and marathon race. Let's be honest, in terms of military strength and capability, people have argued this with me severally. And they said, oh, Russia, they are living in the past. I don't think Russia, they are living in the past. They are one of the superpowers, in quotes, in the world order as we have it today. So there's no way Ukraine is going to be able to, go the long stretch, if this crisis persists and it keeps going on. So I think both countries, talking about Russia and Ukraine, they definitely have to meet each other halfway. And that is why I keep saying that negotiations coming in. But if you look at it, something that is going very well for the Ukrainians now is the fact that NATO, the West, and NATO, they've really supported Ukraine. Not many thought that by this time, that the manner of support that Ukraine is getting will continue till now. Because if you look at the way NATO and the West, they are supporting Ukraine, it seems like the support is not going to stop. even though economically, this is taking a huge chunk of finances from this country. So they keep going on. And when you look at the NATO summit, I was heard in Lithuania, just last week, you saw the huge promises, NATO countries saying that they are going to increase defense expenditure by 3.8% for this year. And they are saying that going forward, NATO countries, they will be using 2% of their GDP, for defense expenditure. And they made a very holistic promise that Ukraine can join NATO at a time that they are looking at, definitely not during this crisis. They've moved it from a two-step pathway to a one-step pathway to kind of speed things up. So when you look at this, verbal support, this moral support, and this military aid that Ukraine is getting, then you begin to have a feeling that this crisis is going to be on for the long haul.
The Black Sea grain deal expires today, Istanbul time, midnight today. Russia has given no indication that it will be extended. And they maintain their position that their own end of the bargain has not been held up by the other side for their own fertilizer and food exports. Do you see this as becoming an impasse that cannot be surpassed tonight?
Yes, it's a very disturbing impasse. I like the way you have put it there. Very, very disturbing. And this is the second time that we are getting to like the final day, and it's looking like this grain deal is not going to be renewed. The last renewal was in June. But I think, humanitarianly speaking, I believe that the Russians will still extend. So they are just using it as a bargaining chip, because they know that they will also lose some moral high ground if they just decide to cancel the grain deal. And then the West may also, Russia behaving like this, waiting to the final day. The West may also be forced to kind of soften their stranglehold on Russian export of their fertilizers and their own grains. Because when you look at it, Ukraine is the highest exporter of grains like corn, wheat, and all that to, poorer regions of the world. According to the UN food program, as at this moment, over 725,000 metric tons of these grains were supplied to Afghanistan, Djibouti, Kenya, Sudan, and all these, very poor regions of the world where these grains are the staple food. So I believe, like you said, tonight, the deal will be extended, but I don't think it's going to be for a long time. It will be very short.
Well, we do hope that it's extended. The Russians have placed a yogurt company of French origin, Danone, I believe, under what they call temporary administration management, in retaliation, obviously, to the sanctions placed on Russian companies based abroad outside Russia. I think they also placed Carlsberg beer company in Russia under administration. It appears the gloves are off, and Russia is in a tit-for-tat with the countries who are sanctioning their oligarchs and their businesses around the world.
Yeah, and yes, this was long expected. In fact, a lot of analysts like myself were even surprised that it's taking Russia this long to have to, take this revenge decision, because in the West, in Germany, in the US, France, and some other countries, a lot of Russian companies, they've been strangled and completely run down. So it's expected. Like I said, it's something that we're all just waiting to happen. It's tit for tat, because the Russians have to also, send a message to these Western nations that they cannot just be bullied. So, like we've said all through this discussion, these are, some of the side accessories, of military confrontation. whatever it will take to destroy the enemy, they go for it.
Finally, Dr. Agbons, let's look at the state of the counteroffensive. Hanna Maliar, the defense deputy minister of Ukraine, says in an admission that is rare, that in the latest one, that the Russians have been they're in a counteroffensive of their own, repelling the counteroffensive in certain areas. Before she said that, there were advances made to the south and to the east and to Bakhmut. President Vladimir Putin says his soldiers are heroic. Not only are they defending those positions, they are pushing the enemy, their enemy, back. So what is your assessment of the current counteroffensive? Hard as it has been, slow as it has been, even by the Ukrainian admission?
Yeah, the counter-offensive has been slow. But to be honest, and from what we have seen, what is on the ground, the Ukrainians have made some gains in terms of this counter-offensive. They've made some gains, and when you also juxtapose this against some of the weaknesses the Russians have with, soldiers fatigue, low morale, and then the Wagner, fighters, the problems they have with the Russian military. The Ukrainians have made some gains, especially in Bakhmut, in Zaporizhia, especially in that eastern region of Ukraine. There's been a lot of pushback, but it has not been as successful as the Ukrainians thought. Some of the areas they actually mapped out that by this time they would have taken back, they've not been able to do so. And the offensive is still on, and it's like we already said, it's part of the reason why the cluster munitions scenario came in. So that too will help. But Ukrainians have made quite a number of gains.
It's 509 or 510 days into this conflict. We hope that it comes to a conclusion sooner rather than later. Dr. Tony Agbons, thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Olumide. Have a great day.
You too.